Good afternoon, and/or good morning. My name is Linda Janak, and I will be hosting the webinar that you're signed on today. I operate a talent management company out of Austin, Texas called Talent Guard, and we're a full-service software and consulting, and we do about 50-50% in both of those areas within the talent management space. And at the end of the presentation, you'll learn a little bit more about Talent Guard. So today's topic, how to do succession planning in 7 steps. Succession planning is a topic that is of great interest to the media, to many organizations, but what I have found in dealing with some of these companies is that very few people know how to do it well. And so what you're going to be looking at today is a storyboard. We tell stories at Talent Guard instead of just giving you a big lecture, and try to bring to life some real life scenarios on some strategies and tactics that you might be able to apply in your own organization to do succession planning. And for those who are with us again, welcome back. I saw that we have many who are repeat visitors, and I appreciate you coming to this presentation again. And if you have been here, you'll recognize some of the people from our last presentation on performance management and 360. So let's get started. In a previous presentation, you met someone by the name of Sarah. And for those who don't know Sarah, she is Miss HR. She's been in HR for a relatively long time, even though she looks very young. And Sarah works for a medical device company. And let's talk a little bit about this medical device company so that we can build some context. They are currently a $5 billion in revenue company. They have about 15,000 employees spread across the globe. Now, the CEO and the executive committee have come together and have committed to the board that they're going to grow revenues by about $5 billion in 5 years. So it's an aggressive goal, but they feel that they're ready to take on that challenge. In addition to that, they want to introduce 10 new superior products, and they have a portfolio of about 50 right now. And they have some challenges that they've been experiencing as a global company. They have global growth, so how do they manage and handle that since they're in many, many countries? They're in a highly competitive industry. The business model is changing, and what that means is this company, where it used to sell to one-on-one with doctors or small doctor groups, are now it's going to be mandatory that they sell to committees of doctors. So those relationships that have been passed down from generation to generation, because this is typically a career where it stays in the family, it's going to be a little more difficult to sell on the golf course. So this organization is faced with having to sell to committees, so that requires a different set of skills and a different type of talent. Lots of regulatory changes, new product development, because they do want to remain on the leading edge. And they've had a difficult time recruiting top talent because the industry is actually pretty small and everybody knows everyone. So and usually within this type of industry or this particular company, when they hire on pretty high-level sales talent, it's usually a contract for 5 years, and the clients that they have go with the salesperson. So it's imperative that retention is really high. But Sarah just received an unexpected email. She's been sitting at her desk. She was having a great day, and she's not happy about the news. Charlie, who has been with the company for over 20 years, has decided that he's jumping ship. He's going to a competitor, doesn't want to renew his contract. Now, what's difficult is that Charlie, of the $5 billion in revenue, represents in his group about $2 billion of that. And so this could be a significant hit to this organization. And as I said, this is an organization that really has to retain talent. So he's decided that he's going to move on. So this is going to present a challenge not only to Sarah in recruiting, but also to the executive team. So really, what is the company to do? It's a big issue, and they can't afford to lose him. So they're going to have to put some something in place in order to kind of secure that loss, if you will. Well, luckily, many months prior, Sarah had recommended to her company that they start to consider succession planning because it was something that she saw as a potential weakness within the organization and one where they really hadn't come up to speed in terms of not just hiring for a replacement, but really thinking strategically about her workforce and what it needed to accomplish based on the goals that the organization has set. So here's a little story about what Sarah did many months ago that helped, quote unquote, save the day. Well, at the outset, as in many organizations, this isn't unique to Sarah's organization, she had a ton of obstacles to overcome. There was leadership and employee buy-in. So this is an organization that had never done succession planning, didn't really understand what it was. A lot of control and ownership over one's position, not really wanting to share. There was a lack of funding for leadership development. She didn't have a big budget. It's not something that they had really invested in up until this point in the company. Is about 20 to 30 years old. It's an old boy network, predominantly men, a couple of females at the executive level, but she knew that that was something that needed to change because the way people got promoted currently is if they were well liked. And she wanted to try to avoid that in the future because they had had some trouble with people being promoted and being not right for the role. There was an inability to identify future talent. She had looked many times at how can our organization start to get people ready, but she just had no tools to enable her to do that. So she knew that she would have to do a lot of groundwork before even launching a process like this in her organization. So how did she overcome it? Well, because she had done it before in a couple of different organizations, she had a plan that had worked for her, and with minor tweaks, she felt that it could be a plan that she could use in this company, and her plan is based on 7 succession planning strategies, from setting clear expectations, identifying and benchmarking key positions. She's going to create some competency models, and using those competency models, identify some high potentials by both looking at performance reviews and multi-rater assessments, identifying the learning gaps and timing for when people will be ready now, and then creating custom development plans. And then to wrap it up, how is she going to monitor this and keep it ongoing as the company continues to mature? So let's take a look at the expectations that she felt needed to be set within her company. So she had a formula for success that she had developed many years ago that really helped her get all of the different issues that could potentially come up on the table so that people could have discussions. And some of these drivers, if you will, is the first one. So how are we going to define the business challenge? Why are we doing succession planning? Well, obviously, the one reason is they lost Charlie. But as we said earlier, the company also had to change its business model. So they need to define what will succession planning do within this company, and they have to also define what skills are going to be needed based on some of those business model and regulatory changes that they don't have today. So the next thing they looked at is who all is involved in the succession planning. Is it HR only? Is it the OD department? Do you have a special team for succession planning? Do you have external consultants, line managers? What type of task force are you going to put together in order to facilitate change? And Sarah's experience has been that it has to be made up of a lot of different people across the organization and include many different levels. And then each person's responsibilities have to be clearly defined. Just think of it as a core department, even if it's volunteer. So what is the scope of succession planning? Should it be CEO only? Should it be at the VP level, at the director level? Should it be more? These things need to be discussed because not all VP roles, which is what most organizations do, are critical. So, right, are you gonna really think about at what length and how broad do we want to initiate this program. And then it's okay to start at one level and add more, or you might really think about what are the critical roles, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. It's going to be a process that's corporate-wide using one overarching model, or are you going to enable the process to be decentralized so that each either business unit or division has decision-making capabilities at their fingertips? What are the constraints? Well, as Sarah had already pointed out, you got to think about budget, resources. So once we do the succession planning, what kinds of resources are going to be required in order to develop these people? And what are the enablers? So how can we put together a communication plan that communicates the values and the intent of succession planning? And usually one of the issues that I see or questions that I get is people will say, how do we put together a succession plan that communicates that it's not guaranteed that you're going to move up? That becomes part of the change management plan and the communication plan, and I believe that communications need to happen often, often, and often. And then finally, what outcomes do you care about? What will be measured? How will this be monitored? Who will be involved? How will we check progress, both at the corporate level and at the executive level? So what she did was bring together an initial team that she thought would be good stakeholders in the process. Her goal was to put all these questions out on the table for discussion. And what she came up with was about 5 other questions that really needed to be answered in terms of that expectation setting and really trying to identify the scope. And Sarah's 5 questions include really asking about what positions are most critical given their current and future goals. So looking at today and tomorrow and making a list of what they think is critical. Another important question, which positions, if vacant, could cause harm to an organization? Harm meaning loss, it could be many things, loss of revenue, loss of efficiency. You need to define as an organization what that means for you. Which positions require special skills or knowledge or clearances? Because there are specific industries that have, economists, for example, that have to be specialized in an area, or financial planners. Which positions have been hard to recruit for? We know a particular organization that has a real hard time recruiting clinical nurses because of the high education requirements, and it takes them almost a year to fill one role. So having somebody leave that role is very costly and time-consuming. And then you need to really think about labor shortages. What's going into universities? What are coming out? Are we going to have the workforce prepared for what we need in the future? So you do need to bring a little bit of, external market data into your planning. It doesn't need to be a lot, just enough to understand. And then what Sarah did is she used a tool that was prepared by Talent Guard, which is called the Succession Planning Readiness Tool, in order to gather and collect all of this information so that as answers started to filter in, she could do some, synthesize the information and look at it in a coherent way so that she could come up with something that looks like this, criteria. And the criteria being, how do we actually define, what are the defining metrics for what we would consider a critical position or an A-type position in terms of scope, detriment, effects on value creation, consequences of mistakes and consequences of the right person. And what does that mean with our critical positions, maybe with our B-level positions, and with our C-level positions. And it's not that all of these positions are important, it's just that some are more critical than others. So based on all the discussions, they came up with their criteria that they were going to use going forward to help identify those critical roles. And so using that criteria, what they came up with was 5 key areas in about 10 different positions. Now, if you got to also think about, what does the company want to compete in? And as I said earlier, the company wants to compete in product excellence. If, for example, they were going to compete in operational efficiency, the 5 key areas that you see up here would be different. So as an HR person, you really need to think about, and you need to be in tune with the organizational strategy, because it is paramount in driving your succession planning process. So we can see here the things included: research and development, product design, customer-facing sales marketing, and, of course, their leadership group. So we have many different roles, and they're defined, which are the A's and which are the B roles. In this case, we didn't do anything for any C roles. But what's interesting to notice is that we have many different types of positions represented. At the executive level, we have some at the director level, we have managers, and we have specialists, the people who are not managers at all but are in a critical role that help drive the company. So with these key positions identified, now we have to really think about what are the competencies for each of those different roles. And the way that Sarah has been successful in her past work is to do something called job analysis or job breakdown strategy. Sometimes people call it work breakdown strategy. And she usually has a spreadsheet that she's going to use to gather information at first. I think the mistake people make is they assume all of the competencies and just run with it. But this is a crucial step. And typically what you're trying to learn from people in the role, i.e. sales, for example, and who touch the role are what do you believe are the skills, competencies, achievements, and learnings that are required to be successful in this role. And we feel that the interviews are best conducted face-to-face or Skype. If you can't do that, then telephone and online surveys are okay. The only detriment to online surveys is you don't get to really lead the questions in some different areas, which is a natural extension of doing interviews. Use a standard template so that you know the types and the depth and the breadth of information that needs to be collected for you to be effective. And what's extremely important is as you collect all this information, so in one example, for one role, we had about 40 different competencies. Now, we knew that that was going to be way too difficult to manage, so what we had to do as a core team is to come together and decide on what is the real name of the competencies, how can we bundle some of these together, and then how do we get these core descriptions. And it may sound easy, but people are very, very particular about their words because it really reflects culture. So it's a process that requires great patience to go through. So after this team had been working for a month or so, Sarah then wanted to start with building that sales competency model. So what she knew was that, and the reason why she wanted to start with sales, one, because they had a vacancy that needed to be filled immediately. But in addition to that, you met John. This is John, one of the top sales guys at the medical device company. She knew that she would need a champion to help facilitate the process. And John was very interested in succession planning, and not only for himself, but also for his team. So she thought that would be great buy-in to demonstrate to the company how this process could work, how it can unfold, and how it could add value. So what happened is Sarah and her task force conducted about 15 job analysis interviews, and these were with people up, down, and across the organization. It included not only sales interviews, but sales, marketing, and finance, because sales touches so many groups in the company that they wanted to make sure that they had a well-rounded view of the perceptions that people had of salespeople. So they went about all this data, they collaborated on it, and they finally agreed on a sales competency model that would work within their organization. And what's represented here is they wanted to look at the competencies in a couple of different ways. Foundational, these might be tenets or values that are important not only in sales, but maybe even across multiple roles. What skills would be required at the management level, and then what competencies are at the leadership level. Now, I've put together many different models, all looking very different. So this is just one example. Sometimes people have personal values, industry skills, technical skills, occupational skills, and leadership. You can have a 5-prong approach. For this example, I'm just keeping it very simple. In addition to having the competency model with the names that they chose as a team, you also have to make sure that your descriptions are clear and that you have indicators that you can measure for each of those competencies. So we know whether people know what we mean by leading change, and then we can measure, are people actually doing this based on our indicators. And they don't have to be very long, but they should be clear. So now that they had a model, they felt very good about being able to start the process of identifying the talent pool or the succession pool. There are many different names for it. But what Sarah also knew is it's a balancing act, because succession planning is based on 2 key ingredients. Your performance review, so how have you done in past appraisals, not just your last one, but also potential. And typically the way that Sarah has gone about measuring potential is through the use of a 360-degree feedback tool that she used independent of any other 360 leadership assessment, if you will. So it's going to require balance, because oftentimes in any organization, not all people complete their performance reviews, and not all organizations use 360s. So you have to have mechanisms in place to be able to pull those data points. So what she did is went and pulled from her talent performance software the names of people that she thought would be, that are in sales, that are at different levels, as you can see here, who she wanted to start with as a pilot to begin the succession planning process. And we can see John, our top sales guy, is in there as well. And they used a 4-point scale, with 4 being a top performer, 1 being not so hot. And we can see the scores presented here. She chose in this just to use their 2012 scores. In addition to that, she conducted a 360 based on those 24 or so competencies that you saw on those previous slides. And the 360 was done with the people that you saw in those performance reviews. So there were about 10 to 12 people that she started with and conducted a full-up 360 campaign. Not only did she do the 360 and was able to see, for example, in this chart, and I know it's a little bit small, that on one particular aspect, leading change, there's some huge discrepancies in the way that people look at John, for example, and his skill in this area. So these are wonderful discussion points that we can think about later, because there are some learning gaps here, obviously. In addition to that, what she can also do is compare competency by competency everybody's scores in those particular areas to see who is excelling in a more progressive way than other people. So lots of data points that she can pull in with the team in order to really evaluate the data to understand who really fits on the succession grid, which we're going to talk about now. And the team decided that they'd use a 9 grid. We've seen a 6 grid. I've seen a 12 grid. This is just the most common. Some people don't use grids at all, but for the purposes of this, we actually like the grid. And typically, what you're going to see here, as I said before, it's a balance of performance. Kind of have that going along the top and potential going up and down. And up in the upper right-hand corner where you see future leader, usually that's your high-performing, high potential. In the lower, it's your low potential, low performance. Typically, the 9s are people who are, exiting the company if we can't move them up or over in one box. Now, I've color-coded these for a reason, which I'll explain later. But these are standard descriptions. You would really want to customize it for your particular industry and environment, and you can have lots of fun with it. And we have with companies that have very open cultures. You can get very creative with the words that you use. But in addition to the words, you also, and I'm only going to go into a little bit of detail, you have to break down also what does it mean to be in a number 1 box in terms of timing. Are they ready now? Is it going to be ready in 6 months? how do we specifically put some parameters around it so as we're having these discussions with managers about who fits where, we're all thinking about the same criteria, the same data to make decisions on. And so then what happens is your employees get plotted based on some first level view. You know, this might be Sarah or an HR person going in and saying, based on all of the 360 feedback and the performance, here's where people fit. And this really is the starting point for succession planning. It's one thing to get the names up there. It's another thing to figure out, do they stay there or not? And that's where it starts to get interesting. And this is typically where, in an organization, you're going to have a lot of politics and a lot of discussion, sometimes not always good, sometimes very, very stressful, around who fits where. So one of the things that Sarah has done, and it has worked for her to really help keep people focused objectively on the competencies and on the model, is to have a hierarchy. So and this is an assumption. This is an assumed thinking that anybody in the blue, those were the leadership competencies. Those are the hardest to master. Those in the green were the managerial, or basically the technical competencies. And in the lower quadrant, those are competencies that are more interpersonal in nature. Now, people will span multiple different boxes in multiple different areas. So this is just a simplistic view when you're thinking about really just bringing that attention back to the competencies. How do we really start thinking about people and where they belong? So if we were to look at this and just kind of put some faces on it, we saw that 3 people fit in the emerging leader talent pool, which we said ready for advancement, probably less than 6 months. What it assumes is that they are mastering the skills of being able to forecast, grow a company, and think about the returns and how that plays out in the public market. We have 3 people. But do these 3 people really fit for this VP of sales role? Well, that's when those discussions happen, and we're going to actually look at the gaps. So what the data revealed is they all had several skills that needed to be developed that were far-reaching beyond the ones that fell in that number 2 box. And so let's just take a look at John, for example, since he's been our top sales guy and we know the most about him. So what this chart is showing is that there are, again, the set of competencies that should be mastered if he's in the number 2 box. And those are assumed that if you're in number 2, you're going to have mastered everything else before there, all the way up to 9, except for box 1. But as John's manager and John's peers and lots of people have had these discussions, Sarah made it a point to make a note that he really hadn't mastered organizational awareness and some conflict management. And so it begs the differ on those discussions. Well, can he develop them quickly? Or do we keep it objective and hold it in a very concrete way that, no, if these aren't mastered, the person should not be in that number 2 box. And if he's not in that number 2 box, where should he be? And you will have lots of debate on each of those people. Well, and this is what is often sometimes called a calibration process. So it's not only about your performance scores, but it's also about where, based on those scores, do you fit in the succession box. So although John is a high potential employee, everyone agreed that he should be in box 3. He's a high impact contributor, but needed a little bit more time developing for that VP of sales role. So based on that, Sarah's next strategy then is to figure out how is she going to develop a custom executive development, management development, individual development plan that will help John and the rest of the team get ready for ready now positions. Should they become vacant or should people get promoted? Now, you have your classic individual development plans. Typically what we do is we repeat the competency description, the indicators, and then we make sure that in any given plan there is a multitude of ways from which the individual can develop, and that includes face-to-face types of learning, interactive, they can be books. anything that we can put together both from a free perspective and a paid perspective that will enable the employee to develop skills in the specific areas that are needed. In addition to that, one of the things that we have found to be very useful is to then take that competency and to break it down into all its discrete parts and have a very specific plan that includes what specifically you're going to work on in each either session or date, or however you think about development, a start date and end date, and then obviously associated costs if you can track that and if they have them. That way, people know how the skill builds. You start from the most basic of delegation, what is it and how does it impact you, all the way up to what is going to be your delegating attitude and then some. And this was an actual plan that we had created, which was a 6-month development plan for a particular person on one competency. So coaching and development doesn't happen overnight. But what Sarah found is if you have a coach, and in this case you met Fran in the last presentation, Fran is an external coach that has been working with this medical device company for quite some time because she has a great track record. And she specifically takes the learning that HR creates and then puts together these detailed plans and coaches anyone who needs coaching through with specific time frames. And Fran's goal is after coaching with her, you're going to move up or over one box. So that's her guarantee. So if you are not familiar with coaching, or if your organization does not use coaching, it is a very powerful tool because it can accelerate performance. It really focuses development on what needs to be developed and make sure that all the case studies, all the examples, everything that the coach and the employee do, and a coach can also be internal, are moving the needle in the area that's required. And it also helps employees have better understanding of their talent. So good self-awareness. Now, as a result of Sarah's forward thinking and wanting to do succession planning and the team effort, a pool of Ready Now successors, the custom development plans, and coaching, all the things she introduced us to the company in this pilot project, now the company wasn't so worried about Charlie leaving because they had 2 successors that were identified, that were ready, that were working on their development plans, that they could charge forward and really think about which one of these 2 are going to replace Charlie. And that's what the discussion has to happen now. So finally, as they're thinking about who's going to be the one to take over, you also have to think about how do you measure outcomes. So in Sarah's case, what was real important for her is making sure that succession planning was not a one-time annual event, that it was a continuous process, a process that got looked at all at least 4 times a year at the executive committee meetings. She brought the task force back together at least twice a year so that you could review these. Because what happens, and it's natural that it's going to happen in your organization, is that people will fall into and fall off of your succession matrix for numerous reasons. Performance can creep up on them. If something could have happened, they may have people leave the company. So it's an evolving process that has to happen ongoing, so you're never surprised. And some of the things that Sarah and the team wanted to be evaluated on is time to fill vacant positions, especially from within. The number of Ready Nows, they wanted to double that, and they wanted to have actually 3 successors per role, so they knew that they had to go deeper into the organization. Reduction in turnover, especially at the executive level, and number of employees with development plans that were active and ongoing. So those would be good measures that then they can look at year over and year over. And that pretty much sums up the content part. Just a few words about Talent Guard. As I said, we're a software consulting company. We have a talent platform that has 6 modules that covers almost all aspects of the talent management initiatives, from performance reviews, 360, certification tracking, career pathing is one of our big ones, as well as succession planning. And we do lots of consulting. So about, like I said, 50% of what we do is not with software, and that's why you don't see a heavy emphasis here, because we're really about what's the right solution. Just a little bit about our successor. You're able to do all of the things that we have reviewed here in the presentation today and then some, such as identifying, when you have a talent profile of your employee and you have the succession profile, you're able to see at any given time, are they a match? Where do you need to develop the skills? So we have it all integrated, so you don't have to do a lot of that manual labor. And you can always identify risks, and it has an org chart structure, so you have that, and you can see how many successors in the pipeline. So just a good dashboard to be able to manage all this rather than on spreadsheets. And just a couple of notes, we have a couple of upcoming events that might interest you. For those of you in Houston, our Talent Management Executive Forums coming up on August 29th. We're going to be talking a lot about succession planning and career pathing in that event. There are 2 forums. I encourage you to look at it. The next webinar is September 12th, and we're going to be talking about career pathing. And, really, how do you create a framework that encourages retention, loyalty, and mobility, not just upward momentum? And, of course, if you'd like to schedule a demo or talk to us, we're always here to answer your questions. And this presentation and its recording will be posted online by the end of the day. So you'll be able to go to the webinar page or the webcast page and download it so that you can preview it later if you want to, or just reference any materials. So now what I'll do is open the line to questions, if you have any, and just send them via chat. I got one question about the presentation. Yes, it absolutely will be shared. Okay, and one of the questions here by Betty is, can you comment further on the decision on transparency versus confidentiality in succession planning? Great question, Betty. And, I've seen about a 50-50 decision in that area with all the companies that we've worked with about, do you let people know that they're on the succession chart, if you will, or not? And in this particular case, we did let people know. However, what we did is put a very strong communications and expectation plan together that would enable people to really understand a couple of things. One, just because you're on the succession planning roadmap doesn't mean that you'll stay there. It takes concerted effort. It takes training. It takes development. You have to focus on all of those things. And secondly, people do move off for various reasons. And it doesn't, and in addition, the third one is, it doesn't guarantee a promotion. Just because we think that you have what it takes now, our expectations, our corporate challenges are going to be changing. And so this chart is a living organism. Now, for those who aren't on the chart, does it create problems, if you will, behavioral in nature or not? I've only seen that in one case where somebody got really upset and left. But for the most part, if you have an organization of high performers and they're not on the chart, typically they're going to want to be on it. So the way that we've handled that in the past is to say, okay, if you're on the succession planning roadmap, we don't want you to go brag about it. We want you to be humble. We don't want to make others feel like they're not important. And remember, this could change. So we've made it public to those that are on it, and in many cases haven't made it a big, like marketing campaign to say who all is on the list and who is not. But if somebody asked, we didn't hide it. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, Betty, but that's a start. Okay, let's see. I have to scroll back up the list here. How many competencies do you recommend be considered per position? And one answer for that, an answer and a half, I should say, not more than 12 to 15 competencies. And within those competencies, let's say leading change is an example, we really believe that you should minimize the indicators as well between 5 and 10. Otherwise, your assessment is going to get really, really long, and then it's hard to really develop expertise in any one area. So that's been my experience. Okay, let's see. The slide that talked to Sarah interviewing on competencies. Could you please address who she interviewed to identify the competencies? Wonderful. Yes. What Sarah did is she interviewed people who were in those existing roles. So there were several people that you saw on our list that were VPs of sales. She interviewed those people. She interviewed directors who would naturally be great for career pathing into those roles. She interviewed several sales team members. She interviewed finance, so people who would interact with finance on contracts, sales support, and also marketing. Marketing people who would help the salespeople develop lead generation campaigns, put together proposals, things of that nature, in order to really understand and identify, what is this person doing day in and
Welcome to GoToWebinar, Web Events Made Easy.
Sorry, I don't know what happened. I lost the connection, so I'm just going to speak through the microphone now. I'm not sure how much you heard of that, but I'll just quickly repeat it. In 6 months, if you have not conducted a performance review with that employee, it will be very difficult to include them in the succession planning process. So one of the benchmarks that Sarah's team put together is that you had to be there at least for a year in order to be put on the 9 grid. Now, if your organization isn't large enough and a lot of your employees are new, there could be, you might create a subset, a secondary 9 block that starts to look at potential even if we haven't done the performance reviews. So that might be just a fix and as people start to progress within your company. Okay, let's see. One more question here. Does your model detail who to interview? What we say in that when you're doing succession planning, as long as you're going up the organization, interviewing people up, so the person's, if succession planning is for VP role, you're either going to interview the SVP or the CEO, so that's up, across, so there are going to be some peers in other roles, and down. So you just want to really make sure you have a balance of up, down, and across the organization so that you do have that well-rounded view across many different groups. And the groups would be who interacts with the salesperson. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry about that, Darren. I don't know what happened. The phone just cut off. Let's see. All right, what happened? Let's see. Okay, sorry. Any other questions? I know I lost you there for a minute. Good here? Great. I hope this has been informative, and if you like this format, please let me know because I want to make these very informative for you, and I'm really trying to, what is it like in the day in the life of kind of format. So if you have suggestions for improvement, if it's too much detail or not enough, please let me know because I'm doing these for you, and so any feedback I will definitely incorporate into these presentations. All right, well, if there are no other questions, please, always send me an email. You can, call us on the telephone. Oh, one other question. Okay. Is the succession plan done confidentially or is it open to all managers in the organization? I know we talked about that one briefly. It really is dependent on your culture. I am all for transparency, but that's my own personal view. I think the more you share, the better it is. Although, like I said, I'm not into promoting, people who are on the model. We just say that there are people who come on and off, and I think it's more about communication. But then I have a client right now who will not share it. Even the people who are being developed don't really know if they're on a succession plan or not. They just know that they need to develop. So, and some of them are on the succession plan and some of them are not, and they've done that purposefully. That's just their culture. So, we tend to work within the constraints of an organization, but I've seen it work better when it is shared. Great. Any other questions? All right, well, I want to thank all of you today for your time, and I hope we'll see you on the next webinar and/or in Houston, and have a wonderful day.